Hey guys, Mike V from Reliable Automotive Equipment. Today we're going to be going over the VAS 6321 and the VAS 6321/1, which is the glue repair kit. Right now we're going to start off with this unit. There is a power button on the back side of the unit. However, the system stays mounted in here because it is hardwired from the side. So when you plug this in, if you don't hear the fan running in there, you can just reach behind here. And in the back, you can feel the little toggle switch. Make sure that it's on. You won't see any lights come on the front until you actually push the on button right here. And then you know that you have power up to the unit. So the way this is set up is this is steel dent repair. We're going to be doing a couple different things on normal traditional slide hammers, little pullers and all that. We're going to get into some of the pull tabs and the bridges and how to really attack a nice sized dent in a really organized, efficient way. So what we're going to start off with is on the control panel in the front, whatever button you push, you'll highlight those components on there. So we're going to start off with these two, and they're marked with a Z and a P, which are these setups right here. The nice part about having the letters on here, if you notice on the screen down here, Z and P are highlighted on both sides. So one side is a timer, one side is amperage or the power to the unit. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Z, and all I'm going to do is follow my line for Z and line up the white mark with the line for Z on this side, and then I'm going to follow the line over here and line it up for that side. So that's our starting setting for doing our repair as we start to weld the bits onto the piece of steel. Always start with the recommended settings, and then if they're not sticking like you want them to, then we'll bump up some of the power and some of the time. They actually recommend to bump power up first and then timer, so it's a little combination of both and getting used to it. Once you use it a couple of times, you'll pretty much know where your settings are going to be. So as we pull the pieces out, we have traditional ground clamp. So when you go to put the ground clamp on, where the cable comes in, this is really the area that you want contacting a good ground. If you have this side on here, all your ground is trying to transfer through that little pin assembly. So to have the best contact possible, we'll use it on this side here. The nice part about this little unit is that you can actually weld this into the middle of the panel, which I'm going to show you when we get to that stage. So for right now, I'm putting my ground clamp here. Then I'm going to go ahead and take my other power piece here. And on these two setups here, they're called what we call automatic touch sensitive. So once we hook this up to this unit, as soon as the electrode touches, it'll automatically weld. So we just put this piece into here, snug this up. This can be laying down on the ground, doesn't matter. Then we take this piece here, which is our Z on there, and this piece will go on the top. So now, as we set our depth on this, I want to make sure that the electrode will be able to hit. So I can turn this, drop the electrode down. Be a little bit easier doing this way. I'll do a preset on it. If I drop that down, I want to make sure that my electrode is touching and the feet are not at this point. So this way, when I go ahead and pull the handle, this will be my support on the panel, and that'll pull the piece up. So once I have my preliminary set, hook the line up. So I don't know if you hear it or not, it's a very light, but it's welded on. So if I do a little bit of test on here, as you can see the panel moving, right now it's welding on pretty good. So to break it off, just twist the tip, set it down again, and it's on. So you can, if you think that you want a little bit more than that, take your power knob, the amperage, and just turn it a little bit. And then that will give you a little bit more power. Turn, take off. So it's just that easy, just that quick. So you can really take this piece here and move it right along. Relatively small dent. Or after you've roughed out one of the bigger dents and you have some little low spots in it, you can just take this piece around and just go from piece to piece, and you can control very simply how much pressure you want to put on the panel. The nice part about this is that this system, or this pieces right here, come with some adjustable feet on them. So if you can see the angle coming out on here, you can turn this in if you really want to concentrate your pressure point closer to where you're pulling out. One of the very nice features, if you're ending up doing some hail spots, there's a set of round rings, different size diameters, that we can set up on this. And the nice part about this is if you're doing hail damage or a round circular dent or a square dent, you can actually have this placing around where you want the pressure being pushed down on the panel as you're pulling up the center part of the panel. So this would just slide right on top of here. Put our power back on. So now we can have pressure all the way around the dent if we want it. If you don't need that, we have the 2 feet available for that. So that is the setup on this. You can adjust where you want this handle to be by adjusting this out. So if you want to start out for a little bit more easier grip for pulling up, you can put your little stop out to there, and then it's already preset at that point. It will limit your travel a little bit on the end travel, but it's just to make it more comfortable for you to handle. So we have the different pieces on that. Then if we just stay on the same menu board 1, if we look at P, that becomes the little slide hammer and the little hand puller. They'll both work on the same principle of that. So we go to Z again, which is, I'm sorry, we're actually going to P, so that's actually up a little bit on the timer and a little bit more amperage than what we had for this setup here. So same thing on this. Little power going on. It's not bad, but when you go to hit it with the slide, it's really, you want to just keep it relatively small, or you want a little bit more power if you're really trying to power something out. So again, settings on this, bump your amperage first before you do timer. Don't go crazy on it, just do it in slow increments. Like I said, you use this a couple of times, and depending what type of material that you're working on, you might want a little bit or a little bit less power. Remember, it's always easier to start out low and work your way up rather than start out too high and blow a hole in the panel. So those are the 2 items covered under menu number 1. And what we're going to do now is switch over to menu number 2. So we are done with this piece. So on menu number 2, what we're really going to be working on is A and B. So A is for welding on either round washers or the pull tabs that we have. So on the pull tabs, a couple little differences, not a big deal on this. These are steel, but as you can see, one is straight and one has a half twist on it. And all that is for how you're welding your tabs into place. You want to have your holes to line up with one another so that we can put a pull rod through it and pull out a crease assembly. So depending on what you're working on position of the tab, so you can get these straight ones very close to one another if you're doing a relatively deep crease. If you're doing a radius on a curve, you can put these next to one another and follow that radius around and still be able to fit the bar through there. Because when you weld these tabs on, you do have a little bit of movement on them. So if you're on a radius curve, you can kind of lean some of them so that the bar will be able to go through all of them. Yet when you make your pull, it'll still actually pull that radius the way that it's set up. So when we go into A, my settings on A. So again, the lights light up for this menu board, so we're just looking for A, and we line up both knobs to it. And then on the little slotted tip will be the one that's going to hold the pieces. That just drops into here. And you can rotate this around any way you want, comfortable for holding it. Just snug that up. We are set to go on this. So we are going to take just some straight ones here going across. So again, now we're going to test these and see if this is going to weld on correctly. We can put this in any angle that we want in the gun assembly, it will still weld. So I can hold it off to the side, or I can come straight down on the top, whatever we want to do. So as soon as we touch it, it touches. Again, don't wiggle side to side to test it, pull straight up. So if we pull straight up on it, it's not bad, but I feel it is loosening up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just bump up my power a little bit more. Now I can take the same tab, weld it on again. You can actually weld these on about 4 to 5 times before you have to cut the ends of the tabs. And we do have a special cutter here, which I will show how to trim these up. These can actually be trimmed up to 10 times. So you'll get a lot of use out of these. So I'll throw this on again. Definitely much better. You can actually hear it a little bit. Before it was very, very low audibility. Now you can actually hear it weld on. So as you go to put these on, if you want to get them real close to one another, you can take the bottom of the tab right next to the other one, weld it into place, and then just push it aside. You can have that little bit of movement on it where you're not going to loosen the tab. If you wiggle it or twist it, it will come off. So you can put these on any direction that you need to, as close as you want to, or as far apart as you want to. So the nice part about these is that these are designed to have a decent amount of amperage going through it at a very short amount of time. So the goal here is not to burn off the corrosion protection on the back of the panel. That is something that you will get used to, so please don't think that you need to have super power on these things to get them to do their job. Because what we're doing here, instead of taking the slide hammer or the single puller piece, when you have a crease going across a panel and you're trying to pull out a little section at a time, you have the whole other part of the crease holding you back on that panel for getting the repair out. If you can put your tabs all the way across wherever your damage is, whether it's a crease, it's on a body line, whatever it is, but the more tabs that you put on, and now we put a pulling bridge over the top of it and have the fingers come down and grab the pieces, now when you pull that up, you're distributing your force all the way across the crease, and you're taking off less pressure on each individual tab. So where you're trying to pull out one spot at a time, that's usually why you have tear outs in the metal. The slide hammer with the triangle tip on it, you're trying to pull out a big area, and usually you pull a little chunk of material out with it. And you're trying to get it to weld on hotter so it sticks better. What you're fighting is the damage in the crease area is wanting to hold you back. So if you can spread that out, if you can remove the crease the same way that it went in, because when it went in, it all went in pretty much at the same time. Maybe a millisecond apart, but pretty much all at the same time. So now when you're trying to remove it, if we run across that whole panel, it just makes the repair process easier. It gives you better capability of pulling on these tabs without ripping them off the panel. And then with the pull, as we set up the pull arms on there, you can actually put tension on the panel and lock it and have both your hands free to work the material around it. So it makes working the dent repair process a whole lot easier. So as we mess around with this, let's take the tabs off, and we're going to set these up again and set up a pull bar. But all I'm doing is just a little bit of a twist, and they come right off. And then on the actual bottom part of the tips, very little burn on the tips. And that's the goal of it, is that you don't want to burn the panel away. All we want to do is just get them to really to stick, so that when we put the tension on it, it does what we want to do. We twist them, we take them off. So these can be welded on again with no problem. So on the panel, sometimes you end up with, if you're using the slide hammer or this puller, and you end up doing a little bit of an overpull, you have a little bit of a crown sticking up. So if we go to the other selection on number 2, which would be B, if I set my controls on B, what this gives us now is a really nice tip for shrinking, to take that little crown that's sticking up and take it down without destroying the area around that piece. So the settings on that, timer set automatic on this. Timer will be a little bit longer than what we had before. So all I want to do is find my little high spot that's hanging right there, take the round part, and when I push on it, I want to put a little bit of pressure. and then it takes it right down. I mean, it's really, really a nice unit. So all those little high spots that you have, if you go to tap them down, it'll suck down that whole spot right with it. The little bit of heat that goes on the end of the point is just enough to take that little high spot out. So you can control your pressure of how hard you push down or how light you push down. Again, get used to it on doing the system, and you'll find out that this system here is fantastic for doing that. So what we're going to do here is weld on some tabs. We're going to go ahead and set up, let me get a couple of them out. So the little key rings keep the tabs handy, keep them organized, but the main part is if I end up trimming this tab and this one remains full length, if I weld them together and I'm trying to pull everything out equally, I'm not going to get an equal pull. So when we go into trimming the tabs, when we knock off 1/8 of an inch off of this, I want to make sure that this tab does not get placed with a full-size one. So that is why we do have some extra rings here. When you do your cuttings on the tabs, on the tool it's marked 1 through 10. So when you cut it the first time, just make a ring, put the little number 1 on it, and you know they're all cut to number 1. And I recommend that take your tabs that need trimming, just throw them into a pile for a while and trim them all at one time. And that way you don't lose track of what size tabs are what. So as we take our tabs off, we just weld a couple of them on. Now we'll say their instruction book does not show a glove on, but I like to have one on just in case. So to weld the tab on, and what I forget to do, change my settings. You hear how long that one went? I really should be on A instead of B. So let me back this back off so timer goes way down, and I'll keep A right there. So let me show you one really cool thing. So if we do 1 or 2 tabs by themselves, we can actually take this piece here that we use for doing the automatic welding on. We can take off this tip. And then there's a little hook available. So we can actually pull an individual pulling point out. All we have to do now is just adjust for, because I don't want this hitting the panel, I want this up high enough, so all we're going to do is just screw this back. So same process on this. If you want to weld one of these pieces on instead of using a little dent puller, you have the availability of pulling out individual tabs as you have them set up. So all we're going to do is just get this up to about the right height. And not yet. So that when we go in with that, we can pull up on the panel. So strength of the tab, it looked like, okay, it fell right off, but this is really a high spot right now. So it pulled pretty good on there, but again, you can adjust your amperage on the tab if you need more pulling power on there, but you do have the availability of just doing a single pull with this on there. So I'm going to bump amperage a little bit. I'm going to weld on some tabs. Feels pretty good. You'll get the hang of it the more that you do this on what is a good system. So a couple of pointers too for setting up your tabs. When you're looking at the panel, when it's relatively clean, you can kind of see the areas that are high and low and all that stuff. When you start grinding it off, especially on a body line that is deformed deep inside, sometimes you lose track of where the body line should be. So on this, if we have a nice, flat, flexible ruler that will just fold right into the dents, And this is a really nice little scribe tool. It's just a steel hardened point on the end of it. So if we are going inside areas that are already ground off and there's a body line in there, I can lay it right across the two, push it down into the dent assembly, take this, scribe a mark across. It's visible for me now, and I see where the body line is, so when I'm welding tabs on, I can just follow my line all the way across the tabs, because on a body line, if you veer off just a little bit on the side, you're not getting the pull that you need to get the body line back out. You can also use a fine tip marker. They have one with the kit. It's just a little red marker. Do the same thing, very fine tip on it. Now you have a nice visible line to weld your tabs right over. It will weld right through all that. So just a little tip on that for setting up for dent pulling. Especially on body lines, it works out really, really good. So then when we go to do a pull on the tabs that we have on there, we have these little rods that go into there, and we have all different lengths. So obviously, depending on how long you're setting up, this one here, so now what we want to do is make sure that all our little tabs go right through. If we're doing a longer one, obviously we use a longer bar. They do make two different diameters, all the same length. One is a 7 millimeter, one is an 8 millimeter. 8 millimeter is a little bit more stronger for going across a longer dent. The 7 millimeter gives you a little bit of flexibility on trying to go through a round curve area. It's not a lot more, but it is a little bit something. You don't want to go too weak on this, because when you're pulling on this, you want enough strength coming off the bar to be able to pull everything up. If you're doing a really, like on a quarter panel, doing a big radius on a flare, you will do them in sections. So you can start one off and you can just put all your tabs on and just keep working your bar across and working it as you go along. So one of the simple bars is this one. The center point is fixed. We can't slide this one back and forth. The other bar that we have on here is a longer bar. We can get longer with it. On this, we would end up using the long one from end to end. This one, you're kind of dictating where the feet are going to go by the center of this, so I'm stuck in the middle of the panel. So it's not the best setup for doing this type of pull on this. If you're doing a relatively small area, or if you're doing a rocker panel area where your whole area with the bend on it is super strong all the way across, you can use this all the way down the panel. Works out really, really good. So we'll grab the little bit bigger one. And on the back side here, which I'll show you in a little bit, we'll change this around. This just has a bunch of different feet for the setups on the unit. So they have a double foot setup, a single foot setup, and these will pivot this way, these will pivot this way, and this will also pivot this way. So a little common sense here. When you're setting up one of the pulling bridges, make sure that you're on a strong point of the panel, that you're not going to do secondary damage as you go ahead and pull it. So we'll set up the singles there. So this bar that is longer, the nice part about this is that the center part will move so that we can offset it any way that we want onto the panel, which we're going to need on this one here. So these go on relatively simple. So these little guys right here, these are for hanging the bar off the side of a car. So if you want to hang, obviously we have a door here, it's on the side of the vehicle. You can put the bar on the side, a suction cup up to it, and there's a little tensioning part here that you can actually let this thing hang by itself. So it actually becomes a hands-free setup. So I want to see where we're going to end up. So I'm going to take the end over there. And I want to take this piece right here. So that gives me much better support. Then I can bring this directly over where I want to pull. So this little guy right here, if you're doing a crease across the panel, this becomes a depth indicator. So if I go over to an undamaged part of the panel, I can drop down the pin and I can set it so it's just touching the panel. So now when I'm in the damaged part of the crease, that point would be up. As you pull the crease up and the crease starts touching this tip, you know that you're getting back to the level of the panel that you want instead of guessing at it. It's just a little indicator to help you kind of monitor where you're pulling. So on this one, because we really don't have a crease here, we're just going to do the setup on this. So you want to get your little pin up. Takes a little bit of getting used to here. We lock up in that. Make sure I'm lined up correctly. Then we want to adjust how much do we want to pull on this panel. So you do have the threaded rod here. So I really want to get these arms somewhere around a 45 to start with, because if I start off down at the bottom, to get these to come up to lock, we're going to overpull the panel. So because let me just see how much so you can feel it on here, and obviously you can see how much I'm overpulling the panel right now. So I can just customize this to where I want. Then I can lock them into place. So what that gives me now is the availability of working around the high spots around the area. Obviously we're overpulled on this piece, but this demonstrates that you can actually lock this up. Now you're free to do whatever you want to do. This is also the setup for doing the aluminum pull also, using the carbon system. This is something that is super, super necessary, because when you're working aluminum, you're going to work it out in sections at a time. And I'll drop this back down a little bit, just to we can put a light amount of tension on here. So if you were doing aluminum, now you can use some heat, temperature gun, temperature strips. You can start working the material around it. And in general, if you see when you do a crease area, when you're using this system, you'll see it more on aluminum than you will on steel, because aluminum has a very high tensile strength. So as you're pulling that crease, you're not pulling the crease out of the panel. You're literally pulling the whole panel straight up. And then you're going to go back on it with some heat and stress relief, and you'll see the crease come out and the panel will relax and go back down. Steel panel, you're going to see some of the crease start to come out, and with having these arms, you can do a nice continuous pressure, releasing, going, releasing. You kind of get a feel for the material, and then you can adjust the knob that when you have it at the height that you want, lock it in, and now you can do your stress relief on it. So again, it just really takes your stress that you're putting onto the panel. If you have a crease running down the whole panel, the nice part is as the crease goes down, with your tab sticking in, as you start pulling up on that, it's going to pull out the deepest tab first. So as the bar comes up onto the tabs, your deepest area, they'll be hitting the tabs, and the other ones will just be hanging there. And then as that bar continues to come up, you're getting the center section out, and you're having the rest of the crease come out to it, then you get connection across all the tabs. And that gives you more control of the crease assembly itself coming out, less pressure going in there. All right, so we have the keys on here. We showed how to set the bridge up. If you do have some smaller areas, you don't necessarily have to have the whole bridge set up for it. They have a really nice little setup here. This little bar is hanging on the side of the unit. We can put this little foot on it, adjust it where we want, and then we have a little hook assembly. So we can actually go into here, and then we can set this where we want, and we can do a little fulcrum here where we can push down at this piece here, or you can actually do it just the opposite. Wherever you want to put your area of support, then you can actually pull up on this at this point. So this is a nice little tool if you're doing a relatively small area. You have some nice stability right around there. You can put this pad either way for either pulling up on the bar or pushing down on the end. Another easy way of doing a setup on this without having to break out the whole bar assembly. So we have a little air powered here. So this is going to be a bit trimmer, and here's the actual numbers for doing the trimming. And right now we have it set on number 1, and all we're going to do is take a straight bit, we're going to put it inside of here, and then put it right up against this guide. and that will actually trim off 1/8 of an inch. So the nice part about it is it reproduces the tip perfectly, and the thing is good to go again. So as you continue on, the twisted ones obviously are not going to fit in the same way, so we take the end into the cutter, let this piece drop down in the slot, back it up against number 1, and it trims the same exact amount off. So because of the twist in here, we can only cut this bit 7 times. The regular straight ones can get cut up to 10 times and still be reusable. So when you have your number 1s cut and then you're ready to cut number 2, there's a little wheel under here. If we pull that out, now you can spin this piece here, get number 2 in position, and this will lock in so you have it in the right space. So as you continue on with the bits, just put it to whatever number that you want, trim it away, you have a nice clean edge on it. All right, so let's talk about carbon rod. So this unit does come with a carbon rod assembly, and this basically becomes, you put it in the electrode, it becomes a short circuit, you arc it out, and it's designed to help shrink metal. So in this particular instance here, where we have the oil can effect, we want to do some shrinking on the panel. Carbon rods actually introduce carbon into the metal itself. All the major manufacturers now say that the modern modern steel that's out right now, if you put carbon into it, it will actually make the metal more brittle. So this is not really a recommended method for the newer cars that are out over the last several years. So I want to show you that what I did on this was a little bit of what the carbon rod of moving this around, creating the heat. And if you can look at the close-up, this area, this hole right here, I was just over it just a little bit too long, it burned a hole in it. But what I'm looking at is the pattern here of creating the heat, the actual pits that are in the panel, and the burn-throughs that wasn't even stopped on. So by trying to use a carbon rod for doing the shrinking of the metal does not work well. If you want to use it on older panels, it's fine. If you are going to do heat shrink, if you do need to do heat shrink on a steel panel, you're better off taking an oxyacetylene torch, taking your area that you want to heat up with the flame, dolly behind it, hammer it down, quench it with some cold water when it's done. That's a better way of shrinking the material. When you use the carbon rod and you actually introduce carbon into the steel, and it is being forced into the steel, you end up taking out the integrity of the panel. All right, the other thing I do want to show you is I talked about taking the ground clamp. So if you're in the center of the panel and you really don't want to mark up the outside edge of the door, we can take the ground clamp with our normal tip in it for welding on the bits, which would be program number 2, letter A. And because there is an insulated pin right here to a point at the end of that, I can actually stick this on the panel, take my power unit, and actually weld the ground clamp onto the panel. That way you don't have to grind the edge of a panel to hang the ground clamp on if you don't want to. Another trick is you can take where the belt molding goes, clean off an area where the belt molding is, and put your ground clamp there. It's a little bit easier to hide than it is doing an outer edge of the panel. When you are done to release this, all you have to do is take this and just twist it, and it takes right off. So this just basically welds on just like one of the dent pulling tools. So nice system on that, so you can put it in the center of the door. All right, we're going to talk about the other part of the 6321/A is the glue kit. So on the glue tip for putting the glue onto the panels, the trick of doing this is your cleaning compound needs to be at least 90% alcohol. We don't want to use denatured alcohol. We don't want to use mineral spirits, acetone. Alcohol is an excellent cleaning source that will not leave a residue behind, and at the same time it's going to be the same thing that we're going to use to release the glue tab when we're done using it. So what we want to do is clean the tab itself and the area that we're going to be putting it. So a little bit of alcohol. And a little bit on the glue tab itself. And if you don't do this, and if you don't use 90% on that, you're going to have not a very good success rate of these sticking. So I've tried lesser products before, and they pretty much, as soon as you put pressure on them, they fall off. So all we're going to do now is take the glue that came with the kit, with the gun assembly. We're going to load up the tab. And then we're going to put it right where we want it. You don't have to squish it out really hard, just set it. You would let that cool down a little bit. And because I already have one glued on there, we'll just show you the little hand unit here. If you're just doing a single tab, that you can put a bar through and you can start using one of the bridges. So as we go on this, all I want to make sure is that I have enough pressure on this to be able to move the panel. I don't want to be so much. I actually took one of these the other day, gluing this on using the alcohol. I actually broke the black tab before the glue tab would actually come off, which is actually a great thing because the strength of the glue is amazing. So when we have that, and again, on this, if you're trying to do a smaller area with the ring around it, a lot of the times where you can use glue tabs, you have a long crease down the side of the panel. It's always so much easier seeing where the damage is when the paint is there. So if you clean the panel, set up some glue tabs, do your initial pull using that, you can really watch how the panel's coming out, where your high spots are, your low spots are. Not that you might get everything out of it, but it gets you to a much greater start, because then at that point you may not have to grind off the whole area for welding tabs on. You might be able to get enough of that damage out with stress relief and pulling on the glue tabs that now all you have is a couple minor areas to clean off. Take this with the little dent puller piece on it and go around and just trim out your areas where you want to trim out. Makes it a little bit easier. So once we have that on there, so now we're going to take our alcohol, and with our kit that we have here, they do give a couple of wedges with this. These wedges are used for a couple different things. These are actually a great tool for relieving stress on the panel. So if you're pulling out a crease in an area, you can take the bigger part of the wedge or the little part of the wedge with a hammer, and you can get better results with stress relief with using the little wedges than you can actually a hammer. It's less intrusive onto the material, gives you a better run on it. All right, so to remove what we put on, especially if the glue's been drying for a while, what we want to do is a little bit of alcohol around the glue tab. You don't have to go crazy with it, just so it starts softening up. If you want to have a rag handy just to wipe up any excess. So as that starts working its way in there, if we take one of the wedges, just carefully, don't hit it hard. You don't want to be putting any dents back in there. And then generally, you can start peeling this up, and the piece of glue is off. Obviously, we did not take the dent out, but that was a demo on how to set up the glue tab and take it off again. All right, well, that wraps it up for going over both these products. Our number and name is on the screen for any other information. Go to the website. We'll have all the products listed on there. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.